Have you ever signed something without reading the fine print? Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you didn't look for the trap? Well, they did. And that mistake cost them everything. My name is Maya Delaney, and 5 years ago, I was the chief operating officer of Helix Media Group, a billion-dollar streaming empire. I helped build that company from the ground up. I gave them 10 years of my life, my expertise, and my loyalty. And when they decided I was disposable, when they threw me out like yesterday's trash, they forgot one crucial detail. I'm a lawyer, and I always read the fine print. This is the story of how a single contract clause, one tiny paragraph buried in 247 pages of legal documents, brought a multi-billion-dollar company to its knees. This is the story of how I turned their greed into my greatest weapon. Buckle up, because this revenge, it was absolutely surgical. Let me take you back to the beginning, back when I actually believed in the dream. I met James Harrington at a tech conference in Austin, Texas back in 2014. I was 31, fresh off a successful stint as VP of operations at a smaller media company, and I had just completed my MBA from Stanford on top of my law degree. James was this charismatic entrepreneur with big ideas about disrupting the streaming industry. Netflix is just the beginning, he told me over drinks that first night, but they're corporate, they're safe, they're boring. What if we created something raw, something that gives creators real ownership, something that changes the game? I was hooked. James offered me the COO position for what was then just a startup called Helix. The salary was half what I'd been making, but he offered me something else. 15% equity in the company. 15%. If we succeeded, I'd be set for life. We're building this together, he said, shaking my hand. Equal partners. I believed him. The first 3 years were brutal. We worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. I handled operations, legal compliance, vendor negotiations, content acquisition, and about 1,000 other things. James focused on fundraising and vision. Our small team of 12 worked out of a cramped office in San Francisco, surviving on ramen and coffee. But we grew. God, did we grow. By year 2, we had 2 million subscribers. By year 3, 15 million. We attracted A-list talent, original series that won awards. By year 5, Helix Media Group was valued at $3 billion. $3 billion. My 15% equity was worth $450 million on paper. I wasn't just wealthy, I was set for generations. My daughter Sophie's college fund? Covered. My mother's medical bills? Handled. Financial security? Absolute. James and I had made it. We'd actually done what we set out to do. Or so I thought. The problem started when Marcus Wolf entered the picture. Marcus Wolf was a venture capitalist, one of those Silicon Valley sharks who specialized in late-stage investments. His firm, Apex Capital Partners, had a reputation. They'd invest in successful companies, take controlling interests, then optimize them for maximum profit before a major acquisition or IPO. Optimize was code for gut the soul out of the company and squeeze every dollar possible before selling it to the highest bidder. James brought him to a board meeting in early 2022 without warning me first. Marcus was in his mid-50s, silver hair, expensive suit, and this smile that never quite reached his cold gray eyes. He had the kind of presence that made you feel evaluated, like you were livestock at an auction. Maya, he said, shaking my hand with a grip just slightly too firm, James has told me so much about you. The operational backbone of Helix, he says. Backbone. Not partner, not co-founder, backbone. Marcus's pitch was simple. Apex would invest $500 million for a 35% stake in the company. This would give us the capital to expand internationally, develop new technology, and position ourselves for a major IPO within 2 years. You'll both be billionaires, Marcus said, looking between James and me. Actual billionaires. Isn't that what you wanted? I had concerns. Taking on Apex meant giving up some control. It meant Marcus would have significant influence on company decisions. And I'd heard stories about other companies that had partnered with Apex. They rarely ended well for the original founders. But James was enthusiastic. This is it, Maya. This is how we go from successful to legendary. I should have fought harder. I should have seen what Marcus really was. Marcus Wolf wasn't interested in building anything. He was interested in extracting value. He was a corporate raider in a venture capitalist clothing, and companies like Helix were just products to him, products to be repackaged and sold. Over the next year, Marcus slowly tightened his grip. He brought in new board members, his people. He pushed for policy changes that prioritize profit over creative freedom. He started talking about synergies and streamlining and cutting fat. The company I'd built started to feel foreign. But the worst part? James started changing too. Marcus got in his head, convincing him that to be a real tech CEO, he needed to be ruthless, that loyalty was a weakness, that the early team members, including me, were holding him back from his full potential. I watched my partner transform into someone I didn't recognize.
The end came on a Wednesday morning in March 2023. Maya, we need to talk. Conference room A, 10 minutes. It was James. His voice was flat, professional. Not the voice of someone I'd built a company with for 9 years. When I walked into that conference room, it wasn't just James. Marcus was there, flanked by 2 board members I barely knew. And there was someone else, Diane Chen, HR's head of HR, looking uncomfortable. No one smiled. No one offered me coffee. Maya, James began, not quite meeting my eyes. The board has made a difficult decision. We're going in a new direction with the company's leadership structure, and unfortunately, that means your services are no longer required. The words didn't process at first. They were sounds without meaning. What? I finally managed. Marcus leaned forward. To be frank, Ms. Delaney, Helix has evolved beyond its startup phase. We need someone with experience scaling companies at the $10 billion level. Your skill set was perfect for getting us here, but for where we're going, we need different expertise. Different expertise. I had 2 degrees, 10 years of experience building this exact company, and I'd made them billions. But I had different expertise. This is insane, I said, looking at James. James, tell them this is insane. He finally met my eyes, and what I saw there broke something in me. Guilt, yes, but also resolve. He'd already made his choice. I'm sorry, Maya, but I agree with the board. It's time for a change. Time for a change. 9 years. Gone, in 4 words. Diane slid papers across the table. This is your separation agreement. We're offering you a generous severance package, 2 years salary, continued health insurance, and a positive reference. My hands shook as I picked up the document. As I scanned through it, one section made my blood run cold. Employee agrees to forfeit all equity, stock options, and ownership interest in Helix Media Group in exchange for the severance compensation outlined above. They wanted me to give up my 15%. $450 million for 2 years of salary, roughly $800,000. You're joking, I said. My equity is worth hundreds of millions. Marcus's smile was thin and sharp. Your equity was worth that, but as of today, we're restructuring the company's cap table. There's been significant dilution from our recent funding rounds. Your 15% has been adjusted to approximately 2.4%, and frankly, with the changes we're implementing, even that may not be worth as much as you think. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. That's not legal. You can't just dilute my shares without proper notification and board approval, Marcus interrupted. We had both. The board voted yesterday. As a non-board member, your approval was not required. They'd planned this. They'd systematically diluted my equity through funding rounds I hadn't been fully briefed on, using board votes that happened when I was deliberately excluded from key meetings. James had let this happen, had probably helped orchestrate it. You have 48 hours to sign, Diane said. After that, the severance offer is withdrawn, and you'll be terminated for cause. We have documentation of performance issues. That performance issues? I stood up, my voice rising. I've been carrying this company. I've hit every target, exceeded every metric. "This meeting is over," Marcus said coldly. "Security will escort you to collect your belongings." And just like that, I was done. 2 security guards I'd hired myself walked me to my office. My team, people I'd mentored and promoted, watched in shocked silence. Some started crying. Most just stared. I had 30 minutes to pack 9 years of my life into boxes. When I got home, I couldn't even cry. I just sat at my kitchen table, staring at the separation agreement, feeling completely hollow. My phone buzzed. It was a message from James. "I'm sorry it had to be this way. You'll understand someday that this is what's best for the company. Thank you for everything." Thank you for everything. Like I'd been an intern, not the person who'd built his empire. That's when something inside me shifted. The hurt transformed into something else, something colder, something focused. They thought I was disposable. They thought they could take everything I'd built and throw me away like garbage. But they've forgotten something crucial. I was a lawyer before I was an executive, and I'd negotiated every major contract Helix had ever signed, including one very special agreement from our Series B funding round in 2018.
I didn't sign the separation agreement. I went silent for 3 days, letting them think I was broken. Meanwhile, I went to war. First, I hired Elizabeth Moreno, the most aggressive corporate attorney in San Francisco. Her specialty? Hostile takeovers, shareholder disputes, and corporate malfeasance. She'd made her reputation destroying companies that tried to screw over their founders. "Tell me everything," she said in our first meeting. I did. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "They diluted you illegally," she said finally. "The way they structured those funding rounds without proper disclosure, we can fight that. But it'll take years and cost millions, and there's no guarantee we win." My heart sank. "So I'm screwed." "I didn't say that." She leaned forward. "You said you negotiated most of their major contracts. Tell me about the unusual ones, the ones with strange clauses." That's when I remembered. Back in 2018, when we were desperate for funding, we'd signed a deal with Titan Streaming Network, a major competitor, for a content licensing agreement. Titan wanted access to some of our original series for their international markets. In exchange, they paid us $50 million up front and ongoing royalties. But there was a catch. Titan's legal team had insisted on a poison pill clause, a protection mechanism in case Helix ever tried to compete with them directly in certain markets. The clause was buried deep in the contract, Section 47, subsection D, paragraph 12. I pulled up the contract on my laptop and found it. In the event that Helix Media Group undergoes a change in executive leadership affecting 50% or more of the C-suite within a 6-month period, and subsequently announces plans to expand into Asian Pacific markets currently served by Titan, Streaming Network reserves the right to exercise a buyback clause for all licensed content at 10 times the original licensing fee, payable within 30 days of notice. At the time, it seemed like a non-issue. We had a stable leadership team and no plans for Asian expansion. Titan's lawyers had insisted on it as a corporate protection, and we'd agreed because $50 million was critical for our survival. But now? Now it was something else entirely. "What's 10 times 50 million?" Elizabeth asked. $500 million, I said slowly, my mind racing. "Payable within 30 days. And have they announced Asian expansion plans?" I pulled up my laptop and searched recent Helix press releases. There it was, from 2 weeks ago, right after they'd forced me out. Helix Media Group announces ambitious Asian Pacific expansion targeting markets in Japan, South Korea, and Southeast Asia. Marcus's signature move. He always pushed for aggressive international expansion to pump up valuations before an IPO. Elizabeth smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "And you were part of the C-suite, COO. If they're replacing you and potentially other executives..." I checked LinkedIn. In the past 4 months, our CFO had resigned. Our chief content officer had left to pursue other opportunities. With me gone, that was 3 out of 5 C-suite positions. 60% turnover. The poison pill clause was active. If Titan exercises this clause, I said slowly, Helix would have to pay them $500 million within 30 days or face a breach of contract lawsuit that could tie up all their licensed content. Content that represents about 30% of their platform. And what happens if they can't pay? Elizabeth asked. Their stock would collapse. They'd violate debt covenants. They'd potentially face bankruptcy or a fire sale acquisition. Elizabeth leaned back in her chair. Maya, do you know anyone at Titan who might be interested in hearing about this clause? I did. Karen Wu, Titan's general counsel. We'd negotiated that original deal together and we'd stayed in touch over the years. She'd actually reached out to me a few weeks ago, offering sympathy about my situation. Make the call, Elizabeth said.
Karen agreed to meet me the next day at a coffee shop in downtown San Francisco. She arrived in a sharp blazer, her expression curious and cautious. Maya, she said, sitting down, your message sounded urgent. What's going on? I slid a copy of the 2018 contract across the table, Section 47 already highlighted. I want you to read this very carefully, and then I want you to look at Helix's recent announcements about Asian expansion. I watched her eyes scan the page. I saw the moment she understood. Her expression shifted from confusion to surprise to something sharper, anticipation. This clause is active, she said slowly. The conditions have been met. Yes. If we exercise it, Helix owes us $500 million in 30 days. Yes. She looked up at me. Why are you telling me this? You built that company. They threw me away, I said simply. After 9 years of building their empire, they diluted my equity and tried to force me out with a fraction of what I'm owed. James Harrington betrayed me. Marcus Wolf is a corporate raider who's destroying everything we built, and I want them to pay. Karen was quiet for a moment. If we do this, Helix will be devastated. Their stock will tank. They might not survive. I know. This is scorched earth, Maya. I know. I met her eyes. Are you interested? Karen's expression hardened. Titan has been trying to compete with Helix's aggressive expansion for years. Marcus Wolf has been undercutting our content deals, poaching our creators, and generally making our lives hell. If this weakens them significantly... She pulled out her phone and called someone. Martin, it's Karen. I need you to pull the 2018 Helix content licensing agreement and review Section 47, subsection D immediately. Then schedule an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. She hung up and looked at me. If this checks out legally, and I think it will, Titan's board will authorize me to exercise this clause within 48 hours. We've been looking for an opportunity to damage Helix's market position. This is perfect. There's one more thing, I said. I'll need you to do this publicly. Issue a press release. Make it a story. I want everyone to know exactly why this is happening. That's unusually aggressive. Why? Because I want James and Marcus to understand that I did this. I want them to know that their greed and their arrogance cost them everything. And I want the whole industry to see what happens when you betray the people who built your company. Karen smiled. You know what? I think we can arrange that. 2 days later, on a Monday morning, Titan Streaming Network issued a press release that sent shockwaves through the tech industry. Titan Streaming Network exercises contractual buyback clause against Helix Media Group, $500 million payment due in 30 days. The press release detailed the poison pill clause, explained how Helix's executive turnover and Asian expansion had triggered it, and included a statement from Karen. This clause was designed to protect Titan's interests in the event of significant instability at Helix Media Group. Recent executive departures, including the sudden termination of longtime COO Maya Delaney, combined with aggressive expansion into our core markets, have activated this provision. We expect Helix to honor their contractual obligations. They'd specifically mentioned my name, specifically connected my firing to the clause activation. It was perfect. The market reaction was immediate and catastrophic. Helix's stock opened at $87 per share on that Monday morning. By noon, it was at $62. By market close, $43. A 50% collapse in a single day. Financial analysts were brutal in their assessments. Helix Media Group's $500 million liability due in just 30 days represents a potentially existential threat to the company's financial stability. The departure of COO Maya Delaney, who was instrumental in building Helix's operational infrastructure, appears to have triggered a contractual poison pill that management either forgot about or catastrophically underestimated. This represents one of the most spectacular self-inflicted wounds in tech industry history. I watched it all from my home office, tracking the stock price, reading the news coverage, scrolling through industry Twitter where people were sharing hot takes and memes. My phone exploded with messages, former colleagues expressing shock, journalists requesting interviews, investors asking if I had any comment. I ignored them all except one. James called me directly. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Maya? His voice was strained. We need to talk. Do we? Please, don't do this. You're destroying everything we built. No, James, you destroyed it when you threw me away. I'm just helping it burn faster. That clause, you knew about it. You knew it was there and you told Titan. I negotiated that contract, James. Unlike you, I actually read what I sign. There was a long silence. Then, what do you want? Money? We can work something out. Reinstate your equity. Give you a settlement, whatever you want. What I wanted was loyalty. What I wanted was respect. What I wanted was the partnership you promised me 9 years ago, but you can't give me those things anymore. Marcus was wrong. I see that now. We made a mistake. You made a choice, I interrupted. You chose Marcus over me. You chose greed over loyalty. Now you get to live with the consequences. We can't pay $500 million in 30 days. You know we can't. We'll go bankrupt. Thousands of employees will lose their jobs. The company will collapse. For a moment, just a moment, I felt a flicker of guilt. All those people who'd worked so hard, who'd believed in the mission, who'd be caught in the blast radius. But then I remembered their faces when I was walked out by security. I remembered how quickly they'd accepted the narrative that I was disposable. I remembered James's text, "Thank you for everything." You should have thought about that before you destroyed my life. Goodbye, James. I hung up. The media coverage intensified. TechCrunch ran a deep dive on the story. The Wall Street Journal published an investigation into Marcus Wolf's history of stripping companies for parts. Bloomberg wrote a profile on me, painting me as either a calculated strategist or a vindictive villain, depending on who they interviewed. Industry opinion was split. Some people called me brilliant. Some people called me ruthless. Some said I was justified. Others said I'd gone too far. I didn't care. Let them debate. Let them judge. Meanwhile, Helix scrambled. They tried to negotiate with Titan, but Karen held firm. Full payment or breach of contract. They tried to raise emergency funding, but no investor wanted to throw money at a sinking ship. They explored selling assets, but fire sales take time they didn't have. Marcus Wolf held a press conference, trying to paint this as Titan's opportunistic attack, conveniently forgetting to mention that he'd orchestrated my firing and the aggressive expansion that triggered the clause. "This is corporate warfare," he declared. "Titan is exploiting a technicality to damage a competitor." A reporter asked, "Mr. Wolf, isn't it true that this clause was triggered by your decision to fire Maya Delaney and pursue Asian expansion? Weren't you aware of this contract provision?" Marcus's face went red. "We made strategic decisions in the best interest of shareholders." "So you were aware of the clause?" He ended the press conference early. 3 weeks after Titan's announcement, with just 1 week left before the payment deadline, Helix's board announced an emergency shareholders meeting. The agenda had one item: vote on a merger acquisition by Vertex Media Corporation for $2.1 billion. Vertex was a mid-tier streaming company that had been circling Helix for years. This was their chance to buy a wounded giant at a massive discount. Helix's pre-crisis valuation had been over $8 billion. They were being sold for pennies on the dollar.
The shareholders meeting was held virtually. I joined via video link, along with hundreds of other investors, employees with stock options, and board members. James looked like he'd aged 10 years. Dark circles under his eyes, hair unkempt, suit wrinkled. Marcus sat beside him, stone-faced. "Today's vote," James began, his voice hollow, "will determine the future of Helix Media Group. The board recommends approving the Vertex acquisition. While the valuation is below our previous market cap, it represents the best option for preserving shareholder value given our current financial obligations." The vote was a formality. Without the acquisition, Helix would default on the Titan payment in 6 days and likely face bankruptcy. With it, shareholders would get something instead of nothing. But before the vote, there was a comment period. I raised my virtual hand. "James Harrington has the floor," the moderator announced. "That's Maya Delaney," I corrected. James visibly flinched when he heard my name. Every camera in the meeting seemed to focus on my video square. "Miss Delaney," James said carefully, "what would you like to say?" "I want everyone here to understand how we got to this moment," I said, my voice calm and clear. 9 years ago, James and I founded this company together. I gave up a high-paying job to take a risk on a dream. I worked 18-hour days for years building the operational infrastructure that allowed Helix to scale. I negotiated the contracts, hired the teams, and created the systems that turned a startup into a billion-dollar company. In return, I was promised 15% equity, a real partnership. But when Marcus Wolf decided I was disposable, when James chose profits over loyalty, they diluted my equity and forced me out. They thought they could take everything I built and discard me like trash. The contract clause that Titan exercised, I negotiated that deal. I protected this company with that provision, never imagining it would be needed because I trusted that we were partners. That contract was my work. The crisis you're facing now exists because the people in charge were so focused on squeezing me out that they forgot about the very protections I'd built into our agreements. I paused, letting that sink in. This isn't Titan's fault. This isn't bad luck. This is what happens when you betray the people who build your empire. When you treat human beings as disposable. When greed blinds you to loyalty. James, you texted me, "Thank you for everything," after destroying my career and stealing my equity. Well, here's my response. You're welcome. You're welcome for building your company. You're welcome for the contracts that protected you for years. And you're welcome for this lesson in consequences.
The meeting was dead silent. Marcus Wolf unmuted himself. Miss Delaney, your vindictive actions have cost thousands of employees their jobs and destroyed billions in shareholder value. No, Mr. Wolf, I interrupted. Your greed did that. Your decision to gut the executive team and pursue reckless expansion did that. I simply enforced a contract that you should have been aware of. The fact that you weren't, that's on you. He started to respond, but Marcus put a hand on his arm, stopping him. The vote proceeded. The acquisition was approved by an overwhelming margin, 83% in favor. Helix Media Group, once valued at over $8 billion, was sold to Vertex for $2.1 billion. Marcus Wolf's stake in the company? Nearly wiped out. He'd invested heavily in the latest funding rounds at inflated valuations. The acquisition price barely covered the liquidation preferences for senior investors. Marcus walked away with almost nothing. James? He got about $150 million from his remaining equity. Sounds like a lot until you realize he would have been worth over $1 billion before the crisis. As for me, remember how they had diluted my equity to 2.4%? Well, I'd refused to sign the separation agreement, which meant I still owned my diluted shares. At the acquisition price, that was worth about $50 million. Not the $450 million I'd been entitled to originally, but combined with the strategic revenge I'd exacted, priceless.
The fallout continued for months. Marcus Wolf's reputation was destroyed. No serious company would work with him. His firm, Apex Capital Partners, lost several major investors who didn't want to be associated with what the press was calling the Helix disaster. Within a year, Apex effectively dissolved. James tried to stay in tech, but the stain followed him. He'd become a cautionary tale, the founder who betrayed his co-founder and lost everything. Eventually, he left Silicon Valley entirely. I heard he moved to Montana, doing consulting for small businesses, a far cry from the empire he'd dreamed of. Titan Streaming Network got their $500 million payment from the acquisition deal and used it to expand aggressively. Karen Wu sent me a bottle of expensive champagne with a note to reading the fine print. As for me, I took some time off. Spent time with my daughter Sophie, who was 13 and had barely seen me during the Helix years, reconnected with old friends, went to therapy to process the betrayal and the revenge. But I couldn't stay away from the industry for long. 6 months after the Helix acquisition, I launched my own company, Catalyst Media, a streaming platform built on the principles that Helix had abandoned: fair treatment of creators, ethical business practices, and transparent equity structures. I raised $200 million in Series A funding within 3 months. Investors loved my track record, and they especially loved the story of how I'd outmaneuvered Marcus Wolf. She reads contracts, one investor told TechCrunch. She plans ahead. She's strategic. That's exactly who I want to bet on. Catalyst is now worth $1.2 billion. We're not the biggest streaming platform, but we're growing steadily and we do it the right way. Every employee who joins gets clear equity terms. Every contract is transparent. And I've built a culture where loyalty and talent are rewarded, not exploited. Some of my old team from Helix reached out after I launched Catalyst. They'd been caught in the blast radius of the acquisition, laid off when Vertex restructured. I hired several of them, the ones who'd actually valued what we were building together. One of them asked me once, "Do you regret it, destroying Helix?" I thought about it carefully before answering. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that James chose greed over partnership. I regret that Marcus was allowed to destroy what we built. But do I regret enforcing that contract? No, because sometimes the only way to stop people from treating others as disposable is to show them that there are consequences. So, what's the lesson in all of this? What should you take away from my story? First, always read the fine print. Every contract, every agreement,
every document you sign. The details matter. The clauses that seem unimportant today might be your salvation or your weapon tomorrow. Second, protect yourself. In business, loyalty is rare. People will promise you partnerships, equity, and respect. But when money is on the line, many of those promises evaporate. Document everything. Keep records. Make sure you have leverage. Third, know your worth. James and Marcus thought I was disposable because they only saw my labor, not my value. They forgot that I'd built the systems they relied on. They forgot that I understood the business better than anyone. Don't let people reduce you to a function they can replace. Fourth, consequences matter. For too long, people like Marcus Wolf have moved through the business world destroying companies and betraying partners without facing real accountability. Sometimes the only justice available is the justice you create yourself. And finally, the best revenge isn't just hurting the people who hurt you. It's building something better, something that proves you never needed them in the first place. Helix Media Group thought I could erase me. They thought that my 9 years of work could be dismissed with a severance package and a handshake. They thought wrong. That contract clause, Section 47, subsection D, paragraph 12, was always there. They just never bothered to read it because they didn't think I mattered enough to be a threat. Big mistake. My name is Maya Delaney. I built one empire, watched it betray me, and then I burned it down. And from those ashes, I built something better, something that actually lives up to the values we pretended to have. James texted me, "Thank you for everything," when he threw me away. Well, James, you're welcome. You're welcome for the 9 years I gave you. You're welcome for the company I built, and you're welcome for the most expensive business lesson you'll ever receive. Some people are disposable. I'm not one of them, and neither are you. Remember that.